Welcome to Life Stories, where we share tales that inspire, move, and remind us of the strength within us all. Today's story is about a mother and daughter who faced unimaginable betrayal but found their way back to hope, love, and resilience. From a life of comfort to a battle for survival, they overcame every challenge with unwavering determination. Join us as we journey through their struggles and triumphs, uncovering the profound lessons they learned along the way. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories to begin this heartfelt story with us today. On a crisp spring morning, sunlight filtered through the large bay windows of our kitchen, casting golden hues across the white countertops. The scent of freshly brewed coffee and warm pancakes filled the room, a comforting aroma that marked the beginning of another day in our seemingly idyllic life. The breeze from the open window gently rustled the lace curtains, carrying with it the faint fragrance of cherry blossoms from the garden outside. For most, it would have been the perfect picture of domestic bliss. But I now see those moments in a bittersweet light. "Mom, what's for breakfast?" Emily's bright voice rang out as she hurried down the wooden stairs, her tiny footsteps echoing in the quiet house. My 7-year-old daughter had an energy about her that always seemed to light up the room, her golden hair bouncing with each step and her deep blue eyes sparkling with curiosity. "Something special today, pancakes," I replied with a smile, turning to see her face light up at the mention. She loved pancakes, especially when I let her pour the maple syrup herself. Her school uniform, neatly pressed and spotless, reflected her diligent nature. She was ready to conquer another day at her prestigious private school, always eager to learn and impress. As I set the table, arranging fresh fruit, yogurt, and syrup alongside the golden stacks of pancakes, I felt a familiar warmth spread through me. It wasn't just the joy of making my daughter happy, it was the simple pleasure of creating a moment for my family. These breakfasts, though modest in the grand scheme of things, were my way of expressing love and gratitude. "Good morning, Sarah," came David's voice, smooth and steady, as he stepped into the kitchen. My husband, ever the epitome of elegance, was already dressed for the day in his tailored suit. His dark hair was immaculately combed, and his polished shoes clicked softly against the tiled floor as he approached me. David worked as an investment banker, a job that demanded long hours and high stakes. Despite the pressure of his career, he always made time for these morning moments, a habit I had once adored. He wrapped an arm around my waist, planting a light kiss on my cheek. "You really don't have to go all out every morning," he teased, his tone warm but slightly dismissive. "I could make do with toast, you know." I laughed softly, tucking a strand of brown hair behind my ear. "And what fun would that be? It's nice to start the day with something special." David didn't argue, instead turning his attention to Emily, who was busy pouring syrup over her plate. "Don't drown them, sweetheart," he warned playfully, eliciting a giggle from her. As we sat down to eat, Emily began chattering about her day ahead, piano lessons, ballet practice, and an upcoming school recital. David listened attentively, nodding in encouragement as she spoke. Watching the two of them interact was one of my favorite things. It reminded me of why I fell in love with him all those years ago. We had met at a real estate exhibition in Boston, where I was working as a property agent fresh out of university. David had been looking for a luxury home, and our professional exchanges gradually turned into something more. What struck me most about him wasn't his wealth or his confidence but his kindness. He had a way of making me feel like I mattered, like my dreams and ambitions were just as important as his. It was a quality I hadn't often encountered, and I cherished it. But life, I've learned, is rarely as perfect as it seems. Over the past few months, subtle cracks had started to form in our carefully curated facade. My health had begun to falter, though I had no clear answers as to why. Mornings that should have been invigorating left me drained, plagued by bouts of dizziness and nausea. Afternoons brought crushing headaches that no amount of medication seemed to alleviate. And then there was the fatigue, unrelenting and all-encompassing, leaving me feeling like a shadow of myself. "Are you sure you're okay?" David asked one morning, his brow furrowing as he handed me a cup of coffee. I had noticed him observing me more closely lately, his usually sharp eyes softening with concern. "Just tired," I replied, forcing a smile. I didn't want to worry him, not when he already carried so much on his shoulders. Besides, what could I say? I had been to multiple doctors, undergone countless tests, and still had no answers. It was easier to pretend everything was fine than to dwell on the unknown. Emily, however, wasn't so easily fooled. "Mom, are you feeling unwell again today?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry as she peered up at me. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Don't worry about me," I assured her, ruffling her hair. But the look in her eyes told me she didn't believe me. Even my mother-in-law, Margaret, had started to notice. She called every morning like clockwork, her voice crisp and authoritative as she offered unsolicited advice. "Sarah, you really should see another specialist," she insisted one day. "And let me take over Emily's piano drop-offs. You need to rest." Margaret was a formidable woman, the kind who commanded respect without needing to ask for it. Her perfectionism often felt suffocating, but I had learned to accept it as part of being married into her family. Still, her involvement in our lives sometimes felt like more of an intrusion than a help. That morning, as I waved goodbye to Emily and watched her board the school bus, I couldn't shake the unease that had settled in my chest. I chalked it up to exhaustion and headed to work, determined to push through another day. My career as a real estate agent had always been a source of pride for me, a way to assert my independence and contribute to our family. But lately, even that had become a struggle. By lunchtime, the familiar ache in my temples had returned, forcing me to leave the office early. My colleague, Jane, gave me a sympathetic look as she handed me a cup of tea. "You should really take it easy, Sarah. You're pushing yourself too hard." "I'll be fine," I assured her, though my trembling hands betrayed my words. That evening, as I tucked Emily into bed, she clung to my hand a little longer than usual. "Mom, please get better soon," she whispered, her voice heavy with a sadness that broke my heart. I kissed her forehead, fighting back tears. "I will, sweetheart. I promise." But deep down, I wasn't so sure. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. What I didn't know then was that the answers I so desperately sought would soon come to light in the most shocking and unimaginable way, unraveling the life I thought I knew and forcing me to confront truths I never wanted to face. The morning after Emily's heartfelt plea stayed with me, haunting my thoughts as I went about my routine. It was as though her words had planted a seed of doubt in my mind, one that grew larger with each passing moment. As much as I tried to brush it off as a child's concern for her mother, a part of me couldn't ignore the strange patterns in my life. My persistent illness, Margaret's controlling nature, and even David's increasing distance, it all seemed to point to something lurking beneath the surface. The day began like any other. Sunlight poured into the kitchen, warming the polished wood floors and gleaming appliances. I had planned to make a quick breakfast for Emily and David before heading to work. But the moment I stood up, a wave of nausea hit me with full force. The world tilted, and I stumbled, catching myself against the counter just as my coffee cup slipped from my grasp and shattered on the floor. "Sarah." David was at my side in an instant, his strong hands steadying me as I swayed, his brow furrowed in concern. And for a fleeting moment, I saw the man I had fallen in love with, gentle, attentive, and genuinely worried. "You're pushing yourself too hard. You need to rest." "I'm fine," I said, forcing a weak smile as I straightened myself. "It's just morning sickness." The words were a lie, but they seemed easier than admitting the truth. I didn't know what was wrong with me. And worse, I didn't know how to fix it. Emily stood in the doorway, her school bag slung over one shoulder, watching the scene unfold with wide, tear-filled eyes. "Mom, you're not fine," she said softly. "You're getting worse." Her voice broke something inside me. I wanted to reassure her, to tell her everything would be okay. But the words caught in my throat. Instead, I gave her a hug, holding her close as I whispered, "Don't worry, sweetheart. I'll be okay." But as I watched her climb onto the school bus and wave goodbye, I felt anything but okay. Something wasn't right. And deep down, I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. That afternoon, as I sat in my office trying to focus on the tasks at hand, a call came through from Emily's school. My heart sank as I answered, bracing myself for bad news. "Mrs. Wilson," the teacher's voice was calm but laced with concern. "We've noticed some changes in Emily's behavior recently. She's been quieter than usual, spending more time alone during breaks. Is everything all right at home?" The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Emily had always been a bright, outgoing child, full of life and energy. To hear that she was withdrawing was alarming. But it also added to the growing pile of worries that I couldn't seem to shake. "Thank you for letting me know," I said, my voice steady despite the panic building inside me. "I'll talk to her about it." As I hung up the phone, I stared at my computer screen, the letters blurring before my eyes. My health, Emily's behavior, Margaret's incessant meddling, it all felt like too much to handle. And yet, I couldn't let myself fall apart. Not when Emily needed me. That evening, as we sat down to dinner, I noticed Emily watching me intently. She picked at her food, her usual chatter replaced by an unsettling silence. David, too, seemed unusually quiet, his focus fixed on his plate as though avoiding my gaze. "Mom," Emily said suddenly, her voice breaking the tense silence, "can I sleep in your room tonight? I had a bad dream." Her request took me by surprise. She hadn't asked to sleep in my room since she was a toddler, and her words carried a weight that I couldn't ignore. "Of course," I said, reaching out to squeeze her hand. "You can sleep in my bed anytime you want." That night, as she curled up beside me, her small body trembling slightly, I couldn't help but feel that there was more to her request than a simple bad dream. I stroked her hair, whispering soothing words until she drifted off to sleep. But long after she had fallen silent, I lay awake, my mind racing with questions I didn't know how to answer. The following day brought a new wave of unease. As I prepared to leave for work, Margaret called, her tone as brisk and authoritative as ever. "Sarah, I'll be taking Emily to her piano lesson this afternoon. You really should take it easy." I hesitated, the words catching me off guard. Margaret's involvement in our lives had always felt overbearing. But lately, her offers of help had taken on a strange intensity. It was as though she was trying to take over, to insert herself into every aspect of our lives. "Thank you, Margaret," I said finally, my voice careful. "But I'll handle it." Her sharp intake of breath told me she wasn't pleased. But she didn't argue. "Suit yourself," she said curtly before hanging up. As I drove to work, the nagging feeling in my chest grew stronger. Something wasn't right, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. I resolved to visit another doctor, to demand answers, to do whatever it took to get to the bottom of my illness. But before I could act on that resolution, my phone rang again. This time, it wasn't Margaret or Emily's school, it was the police. "Mrs. Wilson," the officer's voice was calm but urgent. "Your daughter is here at the station. She's safe. But she's been crying and asking us to arrest her father." The words didn't make sense at first. I felt my heart stop, the breath catching in my throat. "What?" I managed to whisper. "Why would she say that?" The officer hesitated. "She's given us some very specific testimony. Mrs. Wilson, I think you should come down here right away." Grabbing my car keys, I rushed out the door, my thoughts a chaotic whirlwind. Emily, at the police station, accusing David? It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. As I drove, my hands trembling on the wheel. I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change, and I wasn't ready for what I was about to uncover. The police station loomed ahead, its stark grey walls casting long shadows in the late afternoon light. My heart pounded as I pulled into the parking lot, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on me like a leaden cloak. As I stepped inside, the sterile hum of fluorescent lights and the murmur of voices did little to soothe my growing anxiety. Mrs. Wilson, a kind-looking female officer, approached me, her expression a mix of sympathy and professionalism. Your daughter is in one of the interview rooms. She's safe. But I think it's best if you hear what she has to say. I nodded mutely, my throat too tight to speak. She led me down a narrow hallway to a small room where Emily sat at a table, her face pale and tear-streaked. The sight of her broke something inside me, and I rushed forward, pulling her into my arms. "Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry, but I had to tell them. I couldn't keep it inside anymore." "Tell them what, sweetheart?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "What's going on?" Before she could answer, the officer gently placed a hand on my shoulder. "Mrs. Wilson, why don't we sit down? Emily has already given us her statement, but we'd like her to explain it to you directly." Reluctantly, I let Emily go and sat beside her, my hands gripping hers tightly. She looked up at me, her blue eyes wide with a mixture of fear and determination. "It's Dad and Grandma," she began, her voice shaking. "They've been putting something in your coffee. I saw them." The words didn't register at first. I stared at her, my mind struggling to process what she was saying. "What do you mean? Emily, what did you see?" She took a deep breath, her small hands trembling in mine. "One morning, I woke up early, and I saw Dad in the kitchen. He was pouring white powder into your coffee. I didn't know what it was. But then I heard Grandma say it would make you sick." My heart felt like it had stopped. The room tilted, and I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. "Emily," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Are you sure? Are you absolutely sure?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I didn't want to believe it. "Mom." But it kept happening. Every Friday night, Grandma would bring a new bottle, and they'd go into the study together. I watched through the crack in the door. She said it was to protect our family. The officer cleared her throat gently, drawing my attention back to her. "Mrs. Wilson, Emily's testimony is consistent and detailed. Based on what she's told us, we've obtained a warrant to search your home." I sat frozen, my mind reeling. This couldn't be real. David, the man I had trusted with my life, the father of my child, how could he do something so monstrous? And Margaret, with her polished manners and constant interference, had it all been a facade? As the officers prepared to leave for the search, I sat in the interview room, unable to move. Emily clung to me, her small body trembling with the weight of the secret she had carried for so long. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she whispered. "I didn't know what else to do." "You did the right thing, sweetheart," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "You're so brave. I'm proud of you." Hours later, I found myself standing in the dimly lit kitchen of our home, surrounded by police officers as they combed through every drawer and cabinet. Emily had been taken to a safe location, shielded from the chaos. But I stayed behind, unable to tear myself away. "Mrs. Wilson," an officer called out, holding up a small bottle filled with a white powder. "We found this in your husband's desk drawer." I felt my knees buckle, and I gripped the counter for support. The room seemed to close in around me, the air thick with betrayal and disbelief. My mind raced, connecting the dots, the unexplained illness, the constant fatigue, the headaches that no doctor could diagnose. It had all been deliberate, orchestrated by the two people I had trusted most. Another officer approached, his face grim. "We've also found detailed notes in your mother-in-law's home. They include correspondence with a pharmacist and plans for custody of your daughter. Custody of Emily. The words hit me like a blow. It wasn't enough for Margaret to try to destroy me, she wanted to take my child. 2. The rest of the night passed in a blur. David and Margaret were arrested. Their protests of innocence ringing hollow in the face of the evidence. Blood tests confirmed traces of arsenic in my system. A slow and calculated poisoning that had been going on for months. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, the weight of everything crashed down on me. My life. My marriage. The family I had worked so hard to build, it was all in ruins. But through the darkness, one thought kept me going: Emily. My brave, brilliant daughter, who had risked everything to save me. I reached out to the nightstand and picked up the small notebook where I had started jotting down my thoughts. With trembling hands, I wrote a single sentence: we will rebuild. Together. The days following the arrests of David and Margaret were a whirlwind of emotions. Legal proceedings. And media attention. My world, which had once revolved around the routine simplicity of family life, had been turned upside down. As much as I wanted to crumble under the weight of it all, I knew I couldn't. Emily needed me now more than ever. I moved us into a temporary apartment while the legal process unfolded. It was a modest place in a quiet neighborhood, far removed from the grandeur of the house we had called home. Yet, in its simplicity, I found a strange solace. The walls didn't echo with memories of betrayal, and the small space felt easier to manage in my fragile state. Emily adjusted to our new surroundings with a resilience that astonished me, though the trauma of what she had witnessed was evident in her quiet moments. She was determined to find her footing. Her new school became a sanctuary where she could start fresh. The teachers were understanding and nurturing, and for the first time in months, I saw glimpses of her old self, the girl who loved to laugh, who wore her heart on her sleeve, and who embraced the world with wide-eyed wonder. Therapy sessions became a cornerstone of our lives. Emily's therapist, Dr. Carter, was a warm, maternal figure who understood the delicate balance of helping a child process trauma without overwhelming them. Emily's strength is remarkable, she told me one afternoon as we sat in her cozy office. She's carrying a lot. But with time and support, she'll heal. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. And what about me? I asked hesitantly. It was the first time I had admitted out loud that I too was struggling. Dr. Carter smiled gently. You're doing the best you can, Melissa. But don't forget, you're allowed to lean on others. Healing isn't a solo journey. I took her advice to heart, joining a support group for survivors of domestic abuse. At first, I was hesitant to share my story, fearing judgment or pity. But as I listened to others recount their experiences, I realized I wasn't alone. There was strength in our shared pain, a collective resolve to rebuild our lives. One evening, after putting Emily to bed, I found myself sitting on the couch with a cup of tea, flipping through the pages of a photo album. The images of happier times, family vacations, birthdays, quiet afternoons in the garden felt like relics from a distant life. My fingers paused on a photo of David and Emily, taken at her 5th birthday party. His smile, so genuine at the time, now felt like a cruel illusion. Yet, as much as I wanted to tear the photo apart, I couldn't. Emily deserved to have memories of her father, flawed as he was. The trial began a few months later. Emily was shielded from most of it, her testimony recorded in a safe and controlled environment. I, however, sat through every moment, listening as the prosecution laid bare the details of David and Margaret's actions. The evidence was damning: bottles of arsenic, handwritten plans for custody of Emily, even emails discussing ways to isolate me from friends and colleagues. David's defense was weak at best. He claimed he had been manipulated by his mother, that he had gone along with her plans out of fear of losing her approval. But his excuses only deepened my sense of betrayal. How could a man I had loved, a man I had trusted with my life, choose loyalty to his mother over the safety of his wife. Margaret, on the other hand, was unapologetic. I did what I thought was best for my son and granddaughter, she declared during her testimony, her voice cold and detached. Melissa was unworthy of our family's legacy. Her words stung, but they also solidified my resolve. This wasn't just about justice for me, it was about breaking free from the toxic grip of a woman who had wielded power and control for far too long. The verdict came swiftly. Both David and Margaret were found guilty of attempted murder and conspiracy to harm. They were sentenced to lengthy prison terms, ensuring they would no longer pose a threat to Emily or me. The sense of relief was overwhelming, yet it was tinged with sadness. Despite everything, a part of me mourned the life we had lost, the family we could never be again. But as I walked out of the courthouse that day, holding Emily's hand tightly in mine, I felt a glimmer of hope. We were free to start over. Free to rebuild. Free to create a life defined by love, not fear. In the months that followed, our new normal began to take shape. I found a job at a small real estate firm, where my experience and tenacity quickly earned me a reputation as a reliable and compassionate agent. The work was challenging, but it was also a welcome distraction, a chance to focus on something positive and productive. Emily thrived in her new school, her confidence growing with each passing day. She made friends, joined the art club, and even began taking piano lessons again. Her laughter returned, bright and infectious, filling our little home with a joy I hadn't realized I had missed so much. One evening, as we sat on the couch together, Emily looked up at me with her wide, innocent eyes. "Mom," she said softly, "are we happy now?" The question caught me off guard, but after a moment, I smiled and pulled her close. "Yes, sweetheart," I said, kissing the top of her head. "We're happy, and we're safe. That's all that matters." As I tucked her into bed that night, I thought about the journey we had been on, the pain, the betrayal, the uncertainty. But I also thought about the strength we had found in each other, the love that had carried us through the darkest days. Our life was far from perfect, but it was ours. And that was enough. As the sunlight filtered through the curtains of our modest home, Emily's laughter echoed through the kitchen. It was a sound I hadn't heard enough of in those dark months, but now it was a melody that brought warmth to my heart. Together, we baked cookies, her golden hair swinging as she danced around with childlike joy. Life wasn't the same as it once was, it was better, stronger. We had rebuilt our world, one piece at a time, in a place free from fear and betrayal. Emily had blossomed into a resilient, compassionate child, and I had rediscovered my strength. The past would always be a part of us, but it no longer defined us. Instead, it became the foundation upon which we built a brighter future. That evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Emily leaned her head against my shoulder. "Mom," she said softly, "I'm proud of us." I smiled, tears glistening in my eyes. "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." Our story is one of resilience, love, and hope, a reminder that even in the darkest times, light can be found. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories for more inspiring tales like ours. See you in the next story.